Teachers Talk Radio. You can catch up with all our shows by visiting our YouTube channel or by listening back at ttradio.org. Don't forget to like and subscribe to enjoy more live education conversation from TTR. We hope you enjoy this show.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Hi, good evening viewers. Thanks for tuning in, whether you're listening live or playing back. Thank you so much for joining us. I've got a really exciting show planned this evening. I'm joined by the wonderful Shane Leaning. Hello, Shane.
Hey, great to be here.
Hi, how are you doing? How are you doing?
Really good. I'm all right. I'm in Shanghai, so it's 2 a.m. in the morning, but I'm feeling pretty sprightly actually.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I'm so thrilled to have you. I've been really excited about this show for some time. And obviously when I put the LinkedIn promo out for the past few days, I mean, it's clear quite a few people are excited to listen to this one, and rightly so. So we're honoured to have you on the show today.
Well, thank you. That's lovely.
Okay, so to remind viewers what we're looking at today, the focus of this show is we're looking at the heart of change, the very human work of leadership. So Shane, I know a lot of people know you on LinkedIn, but they hopefully have some viewers that are tuning in that are maybe, you're new to them. Can you kind of give us a background about your current role, your experience, and what it is that you're working on at the moment?
Yeah, so I'm, as I said, based in China, in Shanghai. I've been here for quite a while. So work with schools around the world, mainly on leadership and organizational change. So I'm an author, I'm a podcaster. And most of the work I do is as an organizational coach. So I used to be in schools as a teacher and then leader and then a system level leader across a big group of international schools. And now what I do is I support schools with working through change or working through leadership challenges, working through strategy. So I'm very fortunate to be able to do a lot of travel, to kind of have some really good relationships with some schools, and also through podcasting and kind of social media also share some ideas on leadership and change, so that people, I'm obsessed with conversation, so that's probably where some people might have come across me.
Well, you're so good at it. I think when I've listened to your podcast a few times, there have been so many insightful conversations and you have some wonderful guests. So yeah, I learned a lot from you and from the people that you have on.
Well, it's great, isn't it, Louise? Because you must feel the same doing this show. Like, there's so many people who you just wouldn't be able to just kind of email and say, "Hey, can we just have a chat for a while?" And yeah, on a podcast or a live stream or something, you can speak to these people. So like, it's lovely for the audience, but it's also it's wonderful for us, isn't it? We get to have these amazing chats.
I learn loads. I've had different guests on, and every time I learn so many new things to kind of take away from leadership or from a teaching point of view. So that's wonderful. So if you're ready, Shane, should we get cracking?
Let's go for it. Let's go for it.
Okay, so viewers, we've got a wide range of questions today, and Shane is a visionary. Apologies for embarrassing you there, Shane, but there's so many things we're going to cover today. So we're going to talk about coaching, a bit of CPD, kind of talking about psychological safety, how we can establish that and how we can implement sustainable change. So without further ado, let's launch in. First one, Shane, from your vantage point as a coach, and I know we've discussed this in person last year when we met, what are kind of the signs and symptoms of when you work with a school and you can see that they're kind of losing their own confidence in themselves to kind of bring about sustainable change?
Yeah, this is something that I'm super passionate about, and also my co-author Ephraim Lerner also really passionate about, is that as a sector, our schools as communities have been slowly losing confidence in themselves to make judgments over time, and this is kind of happening in a few ways, really. And I think it's happening slowly, and if you were to be a bit cynical, kind of quite insidiously as well, like it's kind of this confidence erosion. That, and what I mean by confidence erosion is schools feeling confident to make good quality decisions for themselves and to go, this is who we are, this is what we want to do, this is what we believe is the right thing, and let's make that decision. And when I say a community, I'm not just meaning the leadership team, but the teachers, the students, the parents, the admin staff, like the whole school community working together to go, this is what our school is. And I think this has happened for a few different reasons, really. There's kind of a lot of things that have joined together to mean that some of our leaders are slightly less confident. So you might look, for example, at some of the wonderful work happening in the UK over the last 10 or so years on codification of teaching and learning, in a way, like where we've looked and we've started to look at the science of learning, and we've started to be able to codify what some good areas of practice are. And while that brings a lot of advantages, what codification also does is it removes a slight bit of agency from the teacher in the classroom or the leader in the school. So it just slowly maybe takes a bit away. But in addition to that, what we're noticing in the UK, but also around the world, is this tendency for schools now to also centralize into big school groups. In the UK, it's a multi-academy trust, for example, but in the international world, there's increasingly these big groups that have a lot of schools. And when that happens, you get the advantages, you get this economy of scale, but also a little by little, you also reduce the autonomy for schools to make their own decisions, because you've got a central team who now has an interest. And the third area that we're kind of seeing, I would say, is a big increase in edu companies or edu consultants who are in this space advising school on their teaching practice, advising teachers on the granular practice of their teaching, advising leaders on the granular steps and the moves that they should make, which are well-intentioned and brilliant people who I work with across the world. But in the end, they can't know the school as well as the school themselves. So schools can slowly, bit by bit, if they're not careful, start to outsource a bit of decision-making outside the school walls. And over time, that has an accumulative effect, right? Every time we outsource a decision, it makes the next one a little bit more challenging for us to make for ourselves. And I think there's a cumulative effect of this that we are seeing in leaders who are not feeling so confident to be able to make good quality decisions for themselves.
Yeah, that's really interesting how you're talking about actually the benefits of working for groups, or indeed in the UK, large mats. But you're quite right, it does in some areas strip autonomy. And I personally have not experienced that, but I do experience the difference. I've been lucky enough to work in the independent sector, as well as in a free school, as well as in converter academies and parts of large multi-academy trusts. And actually, the difference, like you say, there are some real benefits, because you do get to pool resources, you do get to share expertise, you do get lots of professional conversations. And like you say, I love the fact that, we're now digging into cognitive neuroscience at a proper interesting level. And I think the UK is at the forefront, I think bigging us up is at the forefront of actually a lot of this research, and that's really exciting. But as you mentioned, it's interesting that when you centralize, you do essentially erode teacher autonomy in the classroom, particularly when you talked about codification and we're looking at things like teaching and learning playbooks or standards and routines. They're important, but they do kind of take away from what professional staff could potentially be doing or choosing to do.
Yes. I think you're exactly right, Louise. And if you were to look historically at schools, and we could take the UK, for example, you might be able to go back 20, 30 years and see schools that, or even pre-national curriculum time, right? So go a little bit back and start to see schools that have got a lot of autonomy and power in what they do. And then over time, we've centralized some area. And that started with curriculum area, where we was standardizing the kind of nuts and bolts of the what we're teaching. And yet schools were still very autonomous to a big point about how they did things, or how they developed their teachers, for example, or how they run their professional development, how they engaged with parents, what their lessons looked like. And yet now what we see is we see a lot of organizations that are set up to actually deal to support schools with um, the quite granular aspects of teaching and learning day to day. For example, a perfect example would be the rise in instructional coaching, right? And the rise of organizations offering support and how schools can deploy this amazing technique of instructional coaching in schools. Well, this is great. But then if you've got companies that are holding a lot of information on how you do that instructional coaching, you have to ask, and it's being executed by teachers or let's say middle leaders, you have to ask how well informed and how knowledgeable is this principal or the head teacher of that school about how instructional coaching works in their school. Ideally, the head should know very clearly how it's working. I think in reality, we often see kind of an outsourcing slightly to the side when we're talking about some of these initiatives where it's delegated to a member of the team who's responsible for that. And the leader loses slight autonomy in what's happening there and the why behind what they're doing. And that's okay if it's just one thing, but imagine many things happening around the school where different organizations, you've got an organization helping you over here with, cognitive science, you've got organizations helping you over here with HR practices or whatever these different areas are with parental engagement. Eventually, as a leader, you're starting to lose sight of how your school is actually running on a day-to-day basis, and over time that's going to have an effect on your confidence to be able to make decisions, good quality decisions for your schools. So this is an area that I think more people are starting to talk about. There's some good people doing some exciting work in this area, but it's still very young, this conversation.
Interesting. Thank you. The next thing I kind of ties into that, and we've talked about professional confidence kind of at school level and leadership level. And we kind of talk about change being done to us and what that feels and looks like and the impact of, I mean, you've been to lots of wonderful different schools and had, I imagine, a plethora of experiences. What are the signs or kind of the things you hear or the kind of the vibes you pick up when you go into certain schools or places where you think, change is being done to them rather than people being part of the decision-making process?
Yeah. I mean, first I would say as a sector, and I mean this across the world, teachers are some of the most change fatigued people out there, I would say. Often when you see teachers, a new initiative in a school, and I often say teachers have the rolliest eyes of any sector as well, right? Because we sat in the staff room and we hear that new initiative, the leader saying, this is what we're going to do. Oh, here we go again. We've all heard about this cycle of change. We've seen this before, or we've had this done and it didn't last. And actually we know in education, well, we know industry-wise, regardless of education, we know that over 70% of all change initiatives fail in some way. They don't last. In education, we think that's much higher. I think James Mannion and his brilliant work finds is way over 90% of change that actually doesn't last beyond a couple of years. This is quite worrying when we're thinking about that. And I think it shows up in schools in a different way, in different ways. I think sometimes when I'm going into a school, when you are asking questions to staff, and those questions just produce a bit of silence, right? Or very, those kind of diplomatic non-answers where people are just not really talking, and you start to see that people just don't feel safe having opinions. Or maybe you'll see it in some ways in schools where there's less voluntary involvement, maybe parents are not applying to be a part of your parent council, or students are not applying, or teachers are not getting involved in professional learning communities. These are kind of these voluntary involvement are sometimes good testers to say, well, how are people feeling about whether change is done to them, or whether they're a real part of the community. I know Ephraim and I, we talked about a leader, a CEO of a group who Ephraim had worked with, actually, and they were leading across a group of trusts, a group of schools in the UK across a whole trust, and they were wanting to improve some of the communications with parents. But when they were asking parents for feedback, and the parents that came into the school, literally, they were sat in front of 2 parents in this whole school, were the only ones who came in to offer that feedback. And that wasn't because they didn't have the feedback. There were some serious challenges. It was because there wasn't that sense of safety. There wasn't that sense that, as a parent, I'm heard in this conversation. And that was actually where they ended up doing a lot of work on how do we build up this sense of community before we start to launch into our next initiative. And I think these are some of the areas that you might start to kind of get a flavor of where teams are feeling that change is done to them.
That's interesting, because actually you're talking about going into a school and thinking about parent voice. I'm going to be honest, I've never, maybe it's because I'm not yet at SLT level, I've never truly thought about how schools go about establishing those safe communities where people feel heard. And actually, it's not just come in for a parents or an information evening, or come in for an information evening about how to look after social media and your child online. We have those token evenings in schools, but actually I've never really sat down and considered the real kind of culture behind establishing effective family voice, and about the impact it has if you don't do that well.
Exactly. I mean, I've lost count of how many schools that I go into and have worked in myself, where parents are almost seen as adversaries to the education process, like there's some sort of barrier that needs to be overcome, and how terribly sad, because the parents are sending their children to the schools. So I just find that absolutely bizarre. But also I find it bizarre because if you hold that feeling that parents are this other, and that you're kind of, all you have to do is to just do it your way and then convince the parents. We might talk about that ugly word that we might talk about is buy-in, generating buy-in, and you have to generate buy-in with something. You have to buy them into your process. Well, I mean, just the very fact that you're having to sell something to them is probably going to be more of a challenge. What if they were involved earlier in that conversation, and they truly understood the why of the school, and they felt like they had a say, not in the day-to-day running of the school, that's for educators, of course, but a say in the why and the purpose and why you're there. Of course they should do. It's their school. And if they had a voice in that, if you set up some sort of system to kind of bring them into that, where they felt truly this was their school, not just the teacher's school, not just the head school, then later on, when you introduce an initiative that matches up with that expectation of what the school is, well, you're probably going to have a bit of an easier time getting them to buy in, if you like, into that change that you wanted to go through.
Gosh, I'm going to be honest, I feel a little bit embarrassed that I've been so negligent in my thinking. How have I never? I think it's because when I see it from a HOD point of view, or an on the ground teacher point of view, I will regularly have these one-to-one parents of meetings, and I'll get buy-in that way, because we'll talk about being a team at parents' evening, and I'm like, we're here to support you as a team. And we need you to support with homework and that kind of thing. But yeah, I feel like I've been a little bit negligent. So thank you. That's raised something that I think I need to go away personally and think about a bit more. But yeah.
Well, I think something to think about as a community, not to take too harsh on ourselves, but to think about how, as a community, we can make these slight shifts.
Yeah. That's interesting. Thank you. And we've kind of touched upon, you've mentioned the work of some wonderful colleagues. So you mentioned Dave Mannion, and you mentioned Ephraim. And I know that they are wonderful and doing some wonderful work. Is there any kind of particular research that you've dug into, and I know you've dug into a lot from speaking to you, that has really influenced how you think about change and implementing change?
Yeah, I mean, yes, within the implementation world, there's a lot of really good work around this. And so anyone who's studying organizations, I think kind of exploring the work of Edgar Schein would be a really useful place to start. Looking where he's done some wonderful research on kind of how culture as itself as a school is just a set of shared assumptions that we all hold. And that really has really kind of changed my kind of thinking in how we think about culture. If culture is just set of shared assumptions, well, what are those things we're assuming? And that culture is not necessarily written down because it's assumed practice. And how do we dig and how do we surface that out? So I think there's a lot of good work there around those shared assumptions, around values, around the beliefs we have. And that can help you with resistance. But that work also led me to work that people who follow me know that I bang on about, which is the brilliant Amy Edmondson.
Yes.
And her work.
Yeah.
Of course, and her work on psychological safety, and very privileged to have been chatting with her recently, and she's going to be on the podcast later this year as well, which will be amazing. But the idea that Amy Edmondson has with psychological safety is that when adults need to feel safe to be wrong. So she, for listeners, so she did some interesting research. She was doing her PhD a good while ago, where they were actually looking at mistakes, and she was interested in teams and trying to reduce mistakes. And there was a big study that actually happened on with pilots, where they were finding, there's a reason why there's co-pilots in there, for not just for the safety, but also just by having two people thinking things through, it reduces the mistakes. And she was like, this is really interesting. Okay, so that's good. You want less mistakes in the air. So Amy Edmondson went, well, I'm going to kind of replicate this study in the health sector. And so she was like, so I want to see, because surgeons kind of also work in teams, right? So I want to see if those teams that work really well together are making less mistakes. That was her hypothesis. That's what they were finding in with these pilots. And yet when she did this study, she had a bit of a problem on her hands, because she did a study of these surgeons and these groups of doctors. And what she actually found was that the teams that were seemed to be working really well together were actually making more mistakes. And those teams that weren't so well synthesized were making less mistakes. And all of a sudden she was like, oh no, I can't tell my kind of PhD supervisor this. How am I going to explain this? This is a problem. This is not what I was expecting to find. But of course, she found that actually something else was happening. It was actually that those teams were reporting more mistakes, not that they were making more mistakes. And the act of reporting more mistakes made them a more effective team. And this has influenced a lot of work in the business world, but I think a lot of good work happening in the social sectors, including education. And I think is a really key piece of thinking we need to ignore at our peril, that for any change we want to make in a school, for any new thing we want to implement, if we haven't got that psychological safety first, if people don't feel there's trust around here, then we're going to have a real hard time moving forward with any of the specific parts of the change that we want to go through. So I think I could just rattle off a load of names for the whole rest of this episode. Like, there's so many people who've influenced my thinking, Louise, but I guess Amy Edmondson is one that really stands out, and no surprise to you.
No. Oh, I love her work. I think it's good. And I've had so many conversations with so many brilliant colleagues about what psychological safety is. And can I ask you really quickly, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, what is psychological safety not?
So, good question. So psychological safety is not saying, hey, like, mistakes are great. Like, let's all make mistakes. Like, this is like also a classic, like, let's just go and make mistakes, or mistakes are good. It's actually saying, well, there are certain type of mistakes that are definitely not good, right? There are mistakes that cause damage. So we can't just kind of all of a sudden be labeling all mistakes as good. But there are mistakes that actually help us grow, and that when we make the mistake in an open way and be able to discuss it, we're able to adapt our practice and actually kind of solve something together. So psychological safety is not going, mistakes are great. It's not kind of something that you can just kind of say, do a workshop on and say, hey, this is psychological safety and we should all be psychological safe. You can't just kind of promote it. You have to live it as well. Like, you have to really model it and demonstrate it. And that means demonstrating as a leader vulnerability and showing that mistakes truly are okay. And it means looking at some of the things that we know we do with our students. Like, we know low stakes assessments are really useful for students, and high stakes assessments are a problem. But yet sometimes we have these quite high stakes pressure on teachers, such as the idea of a lesson observation being your summative assessment as a teacher, this one assessment. Like, so we have to kind of look at stakes and think about what we mean by healthy mistakes. And it has to be embedded in everything in our culture. It can't just be the latest thing that we're just talking about now.
Yeah. Lovely, thank you. So here is a good time for us to shout out our generous sponsors. So this show and all our TTR shows are brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of PD books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. So hop on if you get a chance. And as I said, I do say this every show, but I like to remind viewers that we do often offer a lot of discounts on our website for Hachette resources. So do pop on and see what you can grab. Okay, fab. So I have got a couple of comments that have come in, Shane, that I wanted to kind of pop off, if that's all right with you. We've got some
Awesome.
live listeners, which is great. So Dr. Wayne E. Reed says, psychological safety is not an environment where fear silences people. Yeah, mistakes are punished and protecting oneself matters more than improving the work.
Yeah. I think you're totally right, Wayne. And it's funny because when you say it like that, Wayne, like when you say, it's not where fear silences people, mistakes are punished. I don't think any leader actively thinks they are the leader that silences people or they are the leader that punishes mistakes, right? So, and yet, as teachers, we just know we've been in those situations where that we have definitely felt that way. So I think a good place to start is to there's a lot of kind of humility you have to take as a leader when you start to assess these things, and you have to look really deep, because sometimes we can think our actions and what we're saying is right and it's kind of creating psychological safety, and yet we don't know actually what those conversations are happening in the staff room, how things are being received. So sometimes we can think we're transmitting in the right way, but the reception is different, and we have to be really careful about that. I think that's a great point.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I've got a few more comments that I'll pop up throughout the show. A lot of support for you, which is lovely. And so moving this on, the human side of change. As someone who works across many different contexts, you've mentioned obviously you've been a teacher before, you're currently a consultant, you're also an author, you're kind of looking at research. What human factors do schools consistently underestimate when they're considering bringing about change?
Well, I mean, it may not be a surprise for you to hear that I think the human factor is underestimated all the time in education and all the time in organizations, in fact, which is partly to do with a confidence thing. I think as organizations, as leaders, we are more confident in, having clear areas that we can know and going, what's knowable and what can I change within the knowable. The problem is that humans on an individual level, Louise, are like deeply unknowable, right? Like we're so messy, and like I'm really messy. Like all my friends are messy, all my colleagues are pretty messy. Well, the problem is in a school, you've got all these different groups of messy humans together. You've got like the messy teachers, you've got the messy students, you've got all the messy other staff, you've got messy parents, and a messy community that sits outside of a school, and they're all in this kind of big kind of this artificial creation that we call a school put together, and to try and do this thing which is called education, which we still haven't fully got our heads around what the purpose is. Like, it's very so it's messy. And I think firstly understanding that, and I think is really important. And I think so many schools can underestimate messiness of the human experience, and therefore get frustrated very quick when things don't follow a linear path, which they rarely do. And interestingly, that's why a lot of change fails, because a lot of things won't work the first time, or something will go wrong. We often say in our work with schools is, it's not what will we do if things go wrong, it's what will we do when things go wrong, because that will happen. So I think first acknowledging like the messiness of that human experience, which is also the most beautiful thing as well, and it's why we do what we do. But I think some of the kind of factors that you might be underestimating specifically, if I was to label a few, might be the idea of skepticism from teams. So you launch an initiative, and then you've got that classic, that teacher who sits in the corner of the staff room who is just grumbling about something, and you see that skepticism, and that skepticism is immediately and often seen as some kind of resistance, right? But actually that can be such an incredible voice in the room. And I always find one of the most powerful questions you can ask these people is not just to kind of get them talking, but to ask them not just because a lot of people who like to complain, don't they, Louise? Like we know those characters, so you keep asking them what's wrong, and they'll tell you everything. But asking them, what would convince you? What would convince you that this was the right thing to do? Great question to ask a skeptic, to turn them into instead of a blocker for the process, into a design collaborator. They might be able to give you something super useful. So I think there's areas like skepticism that we can often look at and underestimate. We can also underestimate power dynamics in the school. You might have heard of the hippo effect, which is the highest paid person's opinion. Who is the highest paid person, and their opinion silences others in the room. It's a documented effect that can happen in companies. For example, you've got the CEO in a room, then people are going to be kind of subtly cueing off them, and they're going to not kind of raise their voice. It can also happen very much in schools. And I think more broadly is the acknowledgement that when we are looking at a change in a school, we have to start from the assumption that this change is going to affect different people in very different ways. Like one change, we often have in our head this idea of a new curriculum change or a new pedagogical shift or whatever it is that we're doing. And we see the positive, we get this optimism bias literally, and we kind of look into the future going, oh, this is how this will kind of be received. In reality, you need to kind of widen your thought and go, this is going to be received in multiple different ways. And how are we going to kind of surface what those different affects are across our organization? And then where do we start from there?
There are so many things I want to pick up here. You've made so many wonderful points. And actually, I know this show isn't about me, but actually I identify with a couple of them that you've made. And I think we do need to remember that education, I hate to use the word industry with education because it sounds like a business, and I've never been a fan of that particularly. When we're talking about people being kind of skeptical, and it's like, well, that is a very human part of change. That is a very human part of human psychology, that actually when you're bringing change in, there will be people that are, I identify as one of those people. Yes, I do complain, but actually a lot of the things that I'm complaining about is because of a lack of knowledge. It's ignorance, because something hasn't been delivered effectively. There's a lack of clarity. There's a lack of reassurance. You feel like there isn't enough support with the change that's being proposed. And so actually what then happens is you get colleagues that are skeptical, that if you don't then give them a forum where it is psychologically safe to say, what are your thoughts? Why are you thinking that? What concerns have you got? Exactly as you said, what would allay your fears? And then actually not just doing a superficial, oh, yes, and then off you pop. It's actually being like, let us come back to you on that, because you've raised something really important, to be honest, that we as SLT or leaders haven't yet considered. And that's why we've got this consultation forum. So we're going to go and take it away. We're not going to deal with it now. We're going to come back to it. and actually come with solutions or different ideas. And I think, I mean, tell me your thoughts. I think that's when people like me feel heard. It's not an on the spot solution like, yeah, we've heard you, we've got you, excellent, or, you know, stop rolling your eyes, Louise.
Yeah.
You feel that you've been heard.
Yes, exactly. I agree. And I would always add like a step into that process, Louise, like, which is to also to think about when you are receiving this kind of feedback from your staff, you're receiving this input. What we can have a tendency to do is either go, yeah, cheers, we'll take it into consideration, or do slightly better what you said, which is thank you, you know, we will take that into consideration and we're gonna come back to you on something. But I think there is often a point that is missing, and that is to check that you have understood them correctly. And this is where so many communication failures go wrong, where you think you're hearing something. And if you are, you know, you're always hearing through a filter for a start anyway, aren't you? And if you're receiving feedback on a project that you've launched, one of those filters is probably going to be pride. It's going to probably be defensiveness. There's going to be a lot of filters in the way. So you're probably going to receive that feedback not exactly in a way that it was intended. So I think one thing I think leaders should do all the time is if someone has said something to you, paraphrase it back to them.
Oh, active
Am I
listening.
hearing this? Yeah, this is what I've heard you say. Can I just check with you that I've got that? Say it back to them. They will then tell you yes, no, they'll, you know, or the fill in the gaps, so that you've then got a clear space to go, okay, now this is what you're saying. Is that right? Okay, now I'm going to do something with that, rather than assuming that you've got the picture. That's often where communication breaks down in a massive way.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and I'm pleased that actually we're talking about this, because I feel like it's one of my biggest concerns when I'm thinking about, as aspirant SLT, how will I be considered? I am one of those people that will be like, I'm not quite sure about this. I have lots of questions, and it's wonderful to hear that actually there are places and kind of leaders and organizations that are welcoming that. It's not just a superficial, yeah, excellent. You know, we've heard you, we've done this forum, great. It's actually, no, we proactively welcome this. And I think Dr. Wayne again has got another good point. The complainers, are your change makers. Involve them early in the project. And I think that's true. I read a really interesting article actually about leadership and about if you do it effectively, before you even kind of go out to your whole school or your team or wherever it is you're taking this proposal, you proactively think about the people that need to be consulted, and you do get them early and you have the conversation. So it isn't we've designed something and now we're bringing it to you, what do you think? It's actually from the get-go, people that should be included have actually been included. So it's a step-by-step process where things are built, like you say, by a community.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a really great point, Wayne, again. And like often if you have got a significant number of complainers, the idea can be like, well, you've always got your complainers, you know, or they always say that. Well, they're a member of your community, and that is, I know it's a bit cliche, but that literally is feedback that you need. But the feedback often comes, and I think this is where I think Wayne picks up really correctly. The feedback often comes at the wrong part of the change process. You're asking them for feedback when you're starting and going into it, rather than when you're actually discussing your why at the beginning and going, have we even got our why correctly? Have we got a foundation for this change? And that might be a better time to start getting that feedback rather than on the implementation.
So I think I distracted you a little bit. I've just put up Grace Barron's comment. She says, yes, definitely this. The why is so important for all stakeholders.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, I think it's it's something we often have to do retrospectively. And that's a real shame. You know, we developed a change model based on design thinking. In brief, it's like a double diamond model. If you imagine two diamonds, and we go from left to right, and the second diamond is all about implementing change. The first diamond is all about understanding what it is you want to change in the first place, what is happening in your current context. And this is the part that is often rushed through. We just actually go so quick through a change process. We go, this is the challenge, we've turned it into a goal, and then we just zoom through from a goal to a solution. And actually, if we can involve people in setting our goal before we start to decide the solution, then we're going to have a much better time later. And it's better to bring those complainers, if you like, early into the kind of setting of the goal, so that everyone goes, have we got a shared understanding of our why and what we're trying to achieve here, like that big change that we'd like to achieve, whether that's we need to improve scores in reading, whether that's we want to have our students expressing more creative, whatever it is in our school that we've decided is important, and that's our why. And then the programs or the changes that we bring in, the initiatives, are speaking to that, and it makes sense for people. People go, I get why we've decided to do that, because I have a clear sense of our why. So yeah, I absolutely agree, Grace.
Thank you. And that was something actually you've kind of commented on there, which I think is really interesting. And it's about, I think, when we're pushed for time and we've got to make rapid change in education, we may have got a poor set of results through, or there may be structural changes in leadership and things have to happen quite quickly. I think actually sometimes the diagnostic process is neglected a little bit. And I'm going to Tom, just get your thoughts on that. Are there other reasons as to why? Is it not just a timing issue? Are there other reasons why we skip the diagnostics and not digging deep enough and go straight to providing solutions?
Yeah, I think there's a few big reasons. Time, but I think also it sometimes just feels not very safe to go there. Like we can feel that moving towards a solution and being solution focused is important. I mean, even in the leadership world, Louise, we have these messages that are sent out, like, don't, the classic leadership phrase. I was trained this in my initial leadership training, that it's okay to say to a member of staff, if you come to me with a problem, make sure you come to me with 3 solutions as well. Well, I think I get where this is coming from. I get it in a way, like you want people to solve themselves. My God, that is not the way to do it. Like you can be coached, like you can have faith that they've got answers within themselves and you can help them kind of to discover those things. But expecting people just to jump to solutions, like the role of a leader is to have a solution, I think is where we make so many mistakes, because we are just obsessed with solutions, obsessed with new things. It is one of the most common challenges I deal with, is going into a school where every time there is a leadership change, there is a fundamental shift in how the school is run, or a fundamental shift in how that department is run. There's a new English leader comes in, so it's a new English approach, and there's a new principal comes in, so it's a new approach. It's because we've been trained over years and years that the symbol of a good leader is to make a change, is to make a big change. In fact, we've become so obsessed by this in that our leadership programs, I think many leadership programs are fundamentally broken around the world. I don't think they're serving our schools. I don't think MPQs are developing leaders in good enough at all for the time and money that's being spent on them. I think one of the reasons is we get so obsessed by teaching teachers how to enact change and not enough time on teaching them how to live in human ecosystems comfortably and to work within that system, how to communicate with their colleague, how to delegate effectively, how to listen well, and instead focused on change. We do it all the time, don't we? Because my first entry into leadership, I had to prove myself by doing a change project. Like
Yes.
this was the entry criteria to become a leader, that I had to lead a new change. We are absolutely obsessed by creating change, and I think we need to shake that up a little bit and slow down slightly.
Yeah, no, I wholly agree with you. And I think it was the old MPQs, wasn't it, where you had to do a big project that you were mentioning there. I
Yeah,
think the newer
right.
MPQs, they're veering away. I mean, the ones I've just done, the MPQSL, it wasn't
Yeah,
a big project. It was more just kind of ongoing research and kind of case study
yeah,
scenarios, which I think lends itself better to what we're talking about here. Because as you said, positive leadership, it's thoughtful, it's reflective, and often the best leaders come in and do their 100 days and they kind of find the lie of the land, and they, like you said, they feel the ecosystem, they read their people, they get to know them. It's not about
yes,
coming in and putting a big stamp on something and saying, hello, I'm Louise and I'm your new assistant principal and this is what I am going to do, because that's quite a selfish way of viewing it. That serves you, and in fact probably in the long run it doesn't serve you, because people don't want to buy into that, because it has to be something that suits the context, and there's that psychological safety and that trust in that relationship with you, and you're not doing it for yourself. It's not, hello, here's a big project, it's me, enjoy it. It's something that needs to suit.
I mean, we take our lead from the business world a lot, and we can't help but be influenced by the Diary of a CEO and these kind of things, where we see these kind of inspirational visionary leaders who have just done something big and ripped up the rule book, and this is really tempting for us. I think education is a different place to that, and it is certainly, I would argue, a lot more complex place when your key driver is not money, which a lot of businesses, which is just how do we create as much profit as possible, but actually changing people's lives and changing human lives in a way. And that is a deeply complex mission, which I think requires a slightly different set of leadership that is more empathetic, leadership that is more driven by community rather than by these deep visionaries at the top.
Thank you. I think, everything you've said so far, I think it's difficult to disagree with. But like you say, talking about it, I think is really easy, but we have to be humble that when we're doing it, we've got to reflect back and be like, this is what we're trying to do, but sometimes we don't quite get it right. But kind of want to move the conversation into more of a coaching direction, if that's okay, because I think it ties in nicely with the things we've just been discussing. In your coaching work, what's one question that kind of we could ask our leaders that might result in a shift in leadership thinking or focus?
Well, I love coaching. I love the power of questions. It's something that I think we need to get more comfortable asking great questions. So I think there are a few questions that come to mind to shift a leaders thinking. One of my favorite ones that I come back to a lot is the idea of, if I wasn't here, would it make a difference? If I wasn't here, would it make a difference? And that question can bring up so many different areas, can't it? It can surface dependency, and to go, oh, there are projects that rely so heavily on me that they're not embedded into this organization. But it also can bring out real vulnerability as well. Like, what is my purpose within this organization? What is that difference that I'm making? But I think that's one question that's really useful, so that leaders can examine, does this change live in me personally, or does it live in the organization? Because ideally, as a good leader, you are making yourself dispensable to the changes or to the organization. Like, that should be like the overall aim of that change should be the most important thing. I think another of my favorite questions is to always think about the future. And I think because change is so unsustainable, especially in education, we have a lot of change that fizzles out within a couple of years. I think a really useful question at the start of change is to ask, in 2 years, let's imagine 2 years time, and this change isn't around anymore. This thing that we're planning right now has fizzled, like many changes.
That's very likely. Yeah,
exactly. So then to ask ourselves, what do we think happened in that time? Let's generate some ideas. Let's think about it. There's going to be a lot of experience in your team and in your room that's going to be able to surface where change has worked well for you in the past, where it hasn't worked well for you in the past. So you can start to kind of think about, well, maybe maybe there's going to be people who have left our school, and they're going to be the carriers of the change, and that's not going to work. Or maybe something new is going to come along that's going to distract us, or we have different priorities each year. It's going to fall off the the development plan. There's different things. So there's that. I think sometimes you don't need to know exactly the answer, and in the same way, sometimes you don't even need to often ask staff as much as we think you do sometimes. I think sometimes we have a tendency to survey everything as well, which I think can be equally problematic. You send out a
They love an
survey
MF
for
form.
yeah, exactly.
They ask you about company
and
culture via an MS form, and you're like, how on earth do I put my thoughts and feelings into quant data? Like, this is concerning that you think this is okay. Like,
yes, exactly. I think sometimes, there is absolutely a place, and I think there's a lot of places where you need to generate feedback. But sometimes all the leadership team needs to do is to put themselves in others' position. We ask this question a lot. In our book, we say, ask the question, what would Joe say? And Joe could be anyone. Joe could be whoever in your school. But what would this parent say? What would this say? And just by putting yourself in that position and starting to imagine the place of other stakeholders in your landscape can already start to open up your empathy and open yourselves up to some of those challenges, to some of the thinking that you need to kind of start to get a handle on before you go into the change. Sorry, I've lost my AirPod. There it is.
I didn't notice that one fall down.
Yeah, it
Okay.
very conveniently fell into my pocket.
Oh, handy. Excellent. So still on the coaching kind of leadership aspect, is when you're working with leadership teams, what's a kind of like a common problem that's kind of presented that actually you think that's the problem, but when you dig deeper, that's not really the problem?
Yeah. So, gosh, it's such a good
big
question.
one, that, isn't it?
So
Sorry.
yeah, no, there's a lot. One of the challenges that comes up a lot when I'm in schools is where leaders say, because I'm usually brought in by a leadership team, right? Teachers don't approach me and say, hey, like, it's usually a leadership team. So they've got their perception of the challenge. And usually they say something like, we have a good grasp of what we need to do. Our teachers are just not there, and we need to bring them on board. And this is often a bit of a red flag, to think there's something else happening here. It's usually a symptom of something quite different, I would say. And often what I find when we start to dig into it, and I often, with my work, I'd ask school, can I spend a bit of time, if we can, before we do our work together, can I spend a bit of time speaking with your community, seeing the lessons, speaking with those different stakeholders? And often you'll start to find things like there's a bit of a trust deficit in the school, or people are not being involved in decisions in the way that they feel that they are, or people are at least perceiving that, or the changes get announced and not developed, so that they bring me in thinking that there's a communication piece that needs fixing, but actually they've got an underlying culture problem, or they've got an underlying safety problem with their staff that they need to start unpicking, which I think is something that I see a lot. I also think sometimes we have this tendency, I don't know if you hear of this term, it's used a lot at the minute, the idea of wicked problems and tame problems, and that we have these complex problems in schools that are sometimes treated as if they're simple problems to solve. And I think sometimes that has been a result of some of the change management thinking that we've had in education. Like, I think there some great work, for example, by the Education Endowment Foundation, and the implementation guidance, which is crammed down every leader who does a qualifications neck, right? Like, we all kind of see this guidance and understand it. But I think sometimes going through that cycle can sometimes make problems seem like they're linear, and also that they're a bit simpler. If only you follow this guidance, then the change will implement correct. And actually, sometimes we have to approach those changes as much more complex and interactive, and that we're going to have to go on a journey of exploration and adaptation, rather than thinking there's a kind of a 10-step framework to get us through this.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, actually. There's obviously a whole host of guidance. The guidance never stops coming out, does it? And don't get me wrong, it is very helpful. But I think you're right about adapting and kind of thinking about my context. Does this work exactly in this kind of like 10-step recipe for success?
Yeah.
And expecting that if you follow it, it will turn out that way, you know, the way that it's meant to. And actually, it is about assessing each step and thinking, is this working? Is this framework working as I want it to? What needs tweaking? But there's something actually I wanted to ask Shane, and this is something that as a HOD, I regularly, I feel like I battle, is how long something takes to kind of embed, and how long we should leave for something to be deemed as successful. Because I think, I mean, we talked about change fatigue earlier in the show. Oh my gosh, yes. I mean, I've only been teaching like 16, 17 years. I mean, many colleagues have been teaching for many more decades than I, and they must be experiencing change fatigue. But it just seems that change happens so quickly, and it's like, it's cyclical, you know. So we'll focus on one thing for 2 years, maybe 3, and then you're starting to get into a routine, and you're starting to see some real, like, you know, significant impact and change, and then before you know it, it's whipped out from underneath your feet, and you're like, no, something else has come in. I mean, I don't remember things like PLTS skills, and then it was like metacognitive thinking, and that was parked for a long time. Then we brought it back in, and then you've got, you know, lots of teaching and learning changes and curriculum changes. And I personally get frustrated sometimes as a HOD, thinking, gosh, decent change, particularly at curriculum level or departmental level, takes around 5 years. And sometimes I feel like change isn't given the adequate time frame that it needs, and it can be really frustrating. And I think, I mean, tell me your thoughts on this. And like, at what point how long should we be giving change? How long should we be kind of allowing for us to be like, yeah, no, it's not working, or let's bin it entirely?
Well, I mean, sadly, there is no magic number, but I think, like you allude to, like, this change takes a long time to embed, depending on the change. I think one of the biggest problems that we have is that when new things come in, they feel so important and urgent. And often the idea is that this thing can't wait. This thing truly can't wait. The perfect example at the minute is some of the rhetoric on AI, for example, AI use in schools, and how use. And people say, you know, the argument, you know, I would be a person who says, well, slow down. You don't have to implement all these new things, you know, before you fully understand them. We need to be careful. And yet the argument that's always leveled against me when I have these conversations is usually, well, Shane, technology won't wait for you. Like, that's going no matter what you do. So you've got, you know, schools have got to choose to either get on board or be out of the game and irrelevant. I think that is a deeply unhelpful, deeply disrespectful to our profession, and really dangerous narrative to take. And I think the reason this is so dangerous is because you can say that. You can say, this change is so important, we have to drop all of our tools and do this. You can do that. But we have done that time and time again. Whatever it is, we have just been in this cycle of doing these new changes. And the reality is, we are in a situation where research is so clear that most change is failing over time. So we can keep kidding ourselves and being naive and thinking, well, this time it'll be different. Or we have to fundamentally shift and say, do you know what? We have to do a few less things well. It's that classic old adage that we've known for years and forever. It's an old saying, doing few things well. And yet it's something we just struggle. Like, we're like little magpies that can't help but jumping on to these new things. I think there's a complexity in that, as we talked about at the beginning. It's to do with confidence as leaders and feel like we have to prove ourselves through a change. It's to do with providers being on the outside of the schools, constantly knocking and saying, are you doing this? Are you doing this? This school down the road is doing this new thing. You should be doing this. It's to do with governments being involved in countries like the UK, where the person who is leading the education conversation is a minister, not an educator, you know, this kind of thing, which means there's change is constantly knocking at a school's door. And the schools that are being able to kind of actually kind of sustain their culture and have a time where they feel their community are on board are slowing down and doing fewer things, well. And I think there's many examples across the world of different school types, whether you agree with the type of education or not, who have simplified down their why and their what, and are actually achieving some pretty incredible things.
I think that's a really good point. And I think sometimes, I think it's also worth raising that you don't necessarily see the amount of pressure for change until you get to kind of more of your senior leadership level. You know, when you're being constantly, your inbox is constantly being spammed with new guidance, you know, from the government, from Ofsted, from the EEF. And I think, you know, lay teachers on the ground aren't exposed to that as much. And so I think it's really important that we do talk about the fact that there is serious pressure for change, and there is pressure for it to be rapid. You know, if you've also got the impending Ofsted inspection coming in, you know, you're like, I've got to be shown to be demonstrating at least that we're making changes, and that changes are in the mix. And Ofsted are quite good at saying, do you know what, actually, we know that change takes time, but we just want to see that you're making the change. And that does apply a lot of pressure. But you're quite right. I love the fact that you're saying it is about doing less, but doing the things that you're doing better, and actually being able to stand your ground and saying, this is why we've made the decision to park that initiative and focus on these instead.
Yeah, you only have, just as individually, we only have so much cognitive load to handle a few things at a time. As an organization, it works in a similar way. As an organization, you can only hold a few things that you're working together towards, and you overload an organization, and the symptoms are change that doesn't last, communities that feel ruptured, that kind of split into different things happening, places where communication starts falling apart and no one understands what's happening here. But actually, an organization that's doing a few things where people understand the why we're here and what we're trying to achieve, well, those communities are generally happier communities, more psychologically safe communities. People are feeling they're comfortable to make mistakes because you've got the space to make mistakes, because you're not doing so many things, and you actually have an energy behind it because people feel, do you know what, I think this change is actually gonna last. And that's a deeply motivating thing.
It is, because that builds the whole culture though, doesn't it? It's that common identity, it's that ethos, it's we're all building something, and it's not I'm dashing between meetings about different initiatives and different documents. It's actually got something that is consistent, and it's embedded, and it's meaningful, and therefore staff actually want to contribute to that because they buy into the vision because they're part of it and they see it. Competing initiatives, or so many, you're like, I've got to do this because I've got to do it, and it becomes really piecemeal, and you're kind of, it's superficial. But like you say, where it's a couple of things done really well, it becomes an actual project that people want to contribute to.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. I agree.
I know we're pushing a little bit of time, but if it's okay with you, Shane, there's one question that I did want to ask before we go, because I think it's a really important question.
I'm awake now, Louise. Like it's 3 a.m. and like I'm wide awake now, so I'm obviously not going to bed before. I'm working with a school in the morning, so I think I'm better just to stay up now. So let's just keep going. Let's go through the night.
Okay, lovely. It's probably a good time to write. I'm finding myself at nighttime now. I'm writing quite a lot more. So maybe it's maybe that time for you. Maybe a new book on the horizon, Shane.
Absolutely.
Okay, right. So last question is, so obviously you've seen many different organisations and schools start change, start new initiatives, and then stall. What is it that separates the schools? So what is it that means that one school is kind of implementing change and it's sustainable and they stick at it, from the schools that kind of fall back into bad habits really quickly?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. So I would come to someone who's done a lot of work in the change space, John Cotter, who's kind of done a lot of work on this kind of 8-step model of change. And he would say that even successful change will fail to last if it's not embedded in the daily operations or the culture of your place. And I think this is where a key difference happens with organizations getting this right, that not assuming that embedding a change is automatic after you launch something, because it's actually very distinct. So I'm going to be working with a school literally tomorrow in the morning, and we're working on some new pedagogical shifts in the school. But as part of that work, and always as part of that work, is always thinking, okay, well, I'm happy to do a workshop with your team, but actually we need to talk about how this is going to be embedded over time and how that's going to be sustained. And that's the important conversation. So I think schools that are doing this well are able to create habits and create rituals around change when they're implemented. So structures that are going to that are reinforcing this change repeatedly over time. So whether that's looking at a calendar and going, what are we going to do? Whether that's thinking, do you know what, in our PD this year, we're not just going to do the kind of twilight sessions, you know, at the end of the day, and we're going to do different things throughout the year, but there's going to be a theme running through because we've identified that, and it's going to be revisited in this way. I think these schools also, at the same time, they find ways to destigmatize that failure that is going to happen along the journey. So actually saying at the beginning, do you know what? We're going to have friction along the way, and that friction is going to be really good information for us to make tweaks, to change. It's not going to be evidence that a change is wrong. We are expecting that as part of this process so that we don't get freaked out at the early signs of failure and then kind of, you know, there's schools that make a lot of that classic mistake is where they just slip back, you know, because they've had an early difficulty. So they just quietly stop. Most changes don't stop grandly, do they? They fizzle. They fizzle slowly until no one starts talking about. Whereas I think schools that sustain, they do things, they start small, they grow organically, and they expect that messy middle, which I think is useful. I also think when we're thinking about change, we should be thinking about leading change as a kind of organizational muscle. So when you're leading this one change, you're not just affecting this change, you're building capacity for future change, because the mistakes you make when, you know, this slips up or this communication doesn't work here or whatever happens in this change is going to be helping you to stretch those change muscles to go, when we do our next thing, even if it's totally different, how are we going to approach this? And I think that that can often mean that when you are starting a new change, one of the best things you can do at the beginning is to go, when did we last do a change well in our school and what happened? And you know, when did we last do a change that didn't last? Let's look realistically, what happened? And let's evaluate that so we can learn from that and utilize that learning. And I guess finally, like as I said before, like I think future focused thinking is really good, where you're thinking into the future and going, I said that 2-year question, you know, in 2 years this change is not around, what happened? I think also framing in the positive as well. Ephraim and I came up with a question as well, to say, well, what about if we asked if in 5 years time the change is still going and this thing is still happening? What happened then? Let's think of that positive view, where this change has lasted. What made it last? And start to think about that. I think the schools that are getting it right, asking these questions of themselves.
No, I think that's really interesting. And there's something actually that my mum said to me once. I think we have that habit of being like, sorry, I'm bringing my mum into this. She was also a teacher, I'd like to add.
Mums know best.
Yeah. And she said to me, every time something bad happens in life, I'm like, why? Why has it gone wrong? And she quite rightly points out there's a million ways for something to go wrong, and there's only one way for it to go right. So actually, when you're thinking about change, we should be anticipating elements of failure and adapting to those and kind of welcoming it, and actually talking about failure, like you say, as part of our organizational muscle, and that being like part of our learning process. And I'm going to be honest, I personally, as a leader, rarely go back and think and actually practically have the discussion with my team. When have we done something really well? And what was it about what we did that made it successful? Because we just kind of get stuck into this habit of, we've got to do things now. We've got a time frame, we've got a deadline, we've got a budget. And we think we're reflecting. Are we actually? I mean, I can't speak for everyone else. I'm sure everyone else does this way better than me, and it's something I'm going to change. But we do need to go back and say, when have we done it well? And more importantly, when have we not done it well? Because that will happen more often than when have we done it well. And we do need to be really humble and brutal with ourselves and say, actually, it's not that's a superficial reason why we think it failed. Let's dig a bit deeper. Why?
Yes.
Why, and why, until you actually get to the really uncomfortable problem at the end of your diagnostic.
I love how you frame that, Louise. Like, yeah, the why, and why is so important. And look, you know, I know the challenge that is leveled. I have this conversation a lot. What's the biggest challenge that's leveled at approaching change in this way? It's slower. There it is. It's slower. I can't promise fast change with this model, but we have to do something different because too much change is failing. So we can continue if we want to do fast change that we think is winning, that we think achieves our school development plan for that year, and it doesn't matter what happens the next year. We can keep burying our head in the sand if we want, or we have to start to, you know, kind of like think a bit more deeply about this and go, do you know what? Actually, we know it's not working long term. So come on, we need to start to slow down in some way. Like, I don't think it's an option in the way that it's always presented at the time as this is urgent. We don't have time for this. Well, if you don't have time for this, you are actively making a choice to reduce the likelihood of that succeeding. And if you're okay with that, good. But if you're just burying your head and going, I'm just hoping for the best, this time it'll be different, well, you know, you're going to keep repeating the mistakes of the past.
Honestly, Shane, this conversation has been wonderful, and I love the sentiment behind how reflective your change model is. And I think there'll be many educators and leaders out here listening now. I know we've got quite a big following listening in at the moment, which is wonderful.
Lovely.
Thinking, oh, thank the Lord, I want sustainable change. And thank goodness we're now having the conversations. We're being brave enough to have them on podcasts where we're saying change largely isn't working and it is too fast. And we aren't diagnosing properly. And we are sacrificing success because of it. So I think it's refreshing to hear the idea of slowing down, because I am tired of so much change. It's needed, but not at the pace that it's happening. And I think it's been wonderful and eye-opening. So thank you so much for joining. Where is it that we can kind of reach out to? I mean, obviously I never stop reaching out to you, poor Shane. I cheer you off regularly. But where can listeners find you if they want to get in contact and talk to you about your change model and your work?
Yeah. Well, I mean, firstly, this has been awesome, Louise. Like, you know, it's one of those conversations I think we committed to months and months ago, didn't we?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, I can do that 2 a.m. And it gets closer and I'm going, Shane, what are you thinking? Like, is this? And I've absolutely loved it. So thank you so much. I am passionate about this stuff. So people, please reach out to me. Like, you can contact me on my website, shaneleaning.com. If you see my name written down, often people think it's Shane Learning. I wish I was Mr. Learning. I'm not
That'd be
Mr.
great.
Learning.
That would be ideal.
Well, you'll like this. The co-author of the book, his surname, he's called Ephraim Lerner. He's one letter away from learner. I'm one letter away from learning. But it's not the case. Anyway, shaneleaning.com. If you type in Shane Learning, I've bought that domain too, so it goes to the same place because that mistake gets made. So you can find me there. I'm on LinkedIn. I think is the place where we're all hanging out these days. I think that seems to be a place. You can find me on most of the social platforms, but I'm mainly engaged there. And go to my website, follow along with the podcast and community, and kind of there's a load of stuff. I love community. I love sharing. So please, you know, get in touch. Like, I absolutely geek out on this stuff. As you know, Louise, it's what a pleasure it is that we all get to just geek out together in this way.
Yeah, as I said, I personally have learned so much, and I've really enjoyed the show. But yeah, I mean, I get the joy of you a lot, which is lovely, and I can't wait to see you again in summer, and Ephraim. So shout out, hello. But yeah, please do get in touch with Shane Leaning and to talk to him about his work and his change model and kind of the research that he's putting into. He is a wonderful colleague. So thank you so much for your time, Shane. And I'm going to let you maybe or not go back to bed. Maybe you're going to stay up and write. Who knows?
Yeah.
Have some more tea. Perk it up.
Yes, exactly.
Tuck into the room beverages you've got there. But everyone else, thank you so much for taking the time and for kind of sending in your comments and questions. Shane will obviously gladly take more, I think, after the show's happened. So do feel free to get in contact. But lovely. Without further ado, No, thank you. It's been wonderful. Have a wonderful evening, listeners, and go and enjoy dinner. Kind of relax, go. It is what you're going to do. And I will join you again in 2 weeks' time. Thank you so much, Shane. Have a lovely evening.
Cheers. Take care, mate.
Bye-bye.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model